Hi guys, and welcome to part 3 of my little run of Salem's Lot reviews. So I've covered the Toe Pooper one from the 70s, I did the sequel from the 80s, and now it's the turn of the mini-series from the noughties, albeit I've still called it a film in my thumbnail. Anything that clocks in at less than 4 hours for me, I will refer to it as a film, even though technically this was a TV mini-series that stayed well away from cinemas. But before we dive into it, a couple more things to say. Firstly, you'll find all my other reviews of Stephen King adaptations in my Stephen King playlist, and there will be spoilers today. Salem's Lot is as old as the hills at this point. Now, I'd never actually heard of this one until fairly recently. I'd always been aware of the Toe Pooper 70s one, even though it took me like 3.5 decades of my life to finally check it out. But this one in the noughties went completely under my radar. I didn't notice it come out at the time, and like I said, it was only this year that somebody pointed out to me that it does exist. Same with the Shining TV show. I didn't even know that existed until recently. I used to think that the only Shining related adaptation was the Stanley Kubrick film, but it's funny the things you learn over time. This one has a fascinating cast though, because there's so many big names for just a small little thing that came out on TV. So we've got Rob Lowe, Donald Sutherland, Samantha Mathis, Rutger Hauer, James Cromwell, big long list of recognisable names. There are even a few minor actors in here that I personally recognise from other things. The director is a little bit lesser known. Mikael Salomon directed this. Now, if you go on his filmography, he's got a list of credits as long as your arm. He's done so much stuff, like documentaries, TV shows, shorts, films. It took me ages to scroll down his list of work, but there was only one thing that really stood out to me, and that was the late 90s film Hard Rain, which I absolutely remember enjoying back in the day, and just thinking about it actually has made me nostalgic and made me want to check it out again. So this version of Salem's Lot has an interesting structure because it's basically the same runtime as the one from the 70s. They've just decided to do another 3-hour thing. You'd think that if they were going to readapt this, they would have made it different. You know, maybe they could have stretched it out into like 5 or 6 hours, included all the details and characters from the novel, made it the ultimate adaptation of Salem's Lot. Although I guess if they'd have done that, it would have cost a lot more money, and they wouldn't have been able to have the same caliber of actors maybe. Or they could have gone the other way and trimmed it down into like a 2-hour film, made it more of a cinematic thing, a bit like what the 2024 movie is trying to do. At the time of doing this review, the 2024 film is just a week away in the UK. But they've not done any of those things. They've made it another 3-hour film or miniseries, whatever you want to refer to it as, same as the Toe Pooper one. This one, though, I would say is more faithful to the novel, at least when it comes to the bigger beats. So the Toe Pooper one, it started out being really faithful to the book, and then in the second half, certain things were changed around, big things as well, like the final skirmish in the Marsden house. That was actually meant to be in the local motel, at least as Stephen King told the story. And there were a few other noticeable differences that the Toe Pooper one did, but this version is a lot more faithful, like I said. But that's not to say that this feels like the ultimate version of Salem's Lot. The 70s one has the advantage of having a more Salem's Lot type vibe to it because it came out in the 70s and it was set in the 70s. It still, to me, feels like the definitive Salem's Lot, whereas this one, not only was it made in 2004, it's also set in 2004, and it doesn't try and hide it. I mean, there's a scene very early on where one of the two main vampires, he's in his furniture shop and he announces that he's not just going to be selling goods in the shop, he's going to be selling them online as well. And in 2004, selling stuff online had only just become a thing. You know, I sort of find it slightly hard to think that a guy like Straker would already have an online shop set up by 2004, but that they've stuck that in there in the script. And there's a few other times where characters are using cell phones. You know, that they've not made it too obvious that this is a 2004 thing, but at the same time they've not kept all technological references out of it. They've not tried to hide it, and at the same time they've not taken full advantage of it in order to make it completely different from the 70s one. Another way that this is superior to the Hooper version is in the location. So in the Hooper one, yes, it was filmed in California, but the minute that David Soul drives into town, it does feel like you are near the coast of Maine somewhere. It captures that sense of place. This 2000s one, it was shot in Australia, but it feels like it was filmed everywhere and everywhere. Honestly, this town this time doesn't really have any personality. It's as if they could have filmed it in 100 different places and just spliced all the different footage together. But it was shot in Australia, and because of that, they've used some local talent to fill out some of the more minor roles. And I definitely got the sense that one or two people were struggling with the American accent a little bit. Another problem I had with this version is the prologue. So we start off with Mia's chasing Callahan through a food kitchen and up some stairs, and when I was watching this, I didn't even know that this was Mia's and Callahan because I hadn't been introduced to these characters yet. So this chase was playing out entirely without context for me. I didn't know what was going on. It was really weird. And then I found out that this is happening after the film we're about to watch. Now, given that this version is mostly really faithful to the novel, it's just odd that they would use a bit of creative license to throw this in at the beginning. It doesn't do anything for the characters for me. It doesn't do anything for the story. It's as strange as Susan turning up to Mexico at the end of the Hooper version. It just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But there are plenty of positive things that I can go into when it comes to this version. Let's talk about some of those. So I did like how we get a few more of the minor characters here than maybe we did in the Hooper version. And I think the way that they've been able to do that this time is by mixing certain characters and subplots together. So, for example, the bus driver character, who was a fairly minor player in the novel, he's included this time, but his little subplot has been mixed with the part of the story where the two kids get accosted in the woods, and they've thrown Danny Glick into this portion of the story as well. So a few different things mixed together for time and clarity, if you like. Another example would be the Jimmy Cody character, the Doctor. In this version, he's having an affair with a woman who lives in a motorhome. Now, in the novel, Jimmy Cody's whole side story, if he had one, was completely separate to those characters from the motorhome. So lots of instances where characters and subplots are being mixed together. It's a little bit like when you have a laptop that's running out of memory, so you defrag the whole thing, and what you're doing is you're just compressing different packets of information together to free up space on the other side of the hard drive. And I've just compared Salem's lot to a motherboard. An all-new Lowe for the channel. Probably out there is one person right now, an IT expert maybe, who's into Stephen King, who appreciates what I just did, but there's probably a whole bunch of other people who've completely tuned out. Let's move on. I like what they did with the Crockett character in this version as well. So the businessman Crockett, he's the guy who is able to help Barlow and Straker move into Salem's lot. Now, in the novel and the Hooper version, he's introduced as a kind of secondary villain, someone who's a bit smarmy and immoral, but then he kind of fades out of the story in both versions, I think. But this time around, he's in it consistently all the way through, and he gets a proper comeuppance, which I really did appreciate. Another cool thing is that we get the proper death for Jimmy Cody this time. So in the novel, he falls through some stairs and lands in a trap. I don't think we got that in the Hooper version, but this time we do. It's really gory and fun, and they've even changed the trap a little bit so that it's like a circular saw that he lands on. Very messy. And one thing I realised is that this was made in the same year that the original Saw came out, so 2004, very much the year of Saw. Sorry. Let's talk about a few of the main characters and how they compare to the previous version. Rob Lowe is very good here, about on a par with David Soul, I would say. I like both interpretations of Ben Mears. When it comes to Susan, though, I think we've had a slight downgrade. Bonnie Bedelia is fantastic as Susan in the 70s one. Like, as soon as she comes on screen, I was like, yeah, that is absolutely Susan from the novel, 100%. But Samantha Mathis's version here, not quite as good. It's not that she's doing anything wrong as an actress. It's just that it feels like this version of Susan is just any heroine from any movie. She doesn't quite have that distinctive Susan feel like the Bonnie Bedelia version. When it comes to Straker and Barlow, again, slight downgrade. There's nothing wrong with Straker. Donald Sutherland is very good in the role. He's on a par with the guy who was in the other version. But I preferred the Barlow from the 70s one easily. That bald-headed, weird-looking guy. A lot of people say that they don't like the Barlow from Hooper's version. I personally did. I thought he was quite freaky. But the version we get here is played by Rutger Hauer, and he's just not cut out for this role whatsoever. He's too rough around the edges as an actor for this kind of role. Like, both Barlow and Straker, they're European, they're prim and proper, a little bit posh, you know. Rutger Hauer, he's the hitcher, you know, he's the android from Blade Runner skirting the edges of society. He's not cut out to play this character. I suspect that they just hired him because it was another name that they could get for a reasonable price, but not the best bit of casting for me. Much better is Matt Burke, who was really done a disservice in the Hooper one. This time around, the casting is much better. His role is a lot more substantial, I think, and he's even got his proper name back, Matt Burke. I can't even remember what name they gave him in the other one. Callahan is much better here, played by James Cromwell. Not so good in the Hooper version. And Jimmy Cody, who I'm not even sure was in the Hooper one, he's been cast very well in this, although I'm not hugely convinced about the affair that he has with the woman from the motorhome. Yes, I could see how he might start to fall for her a little bit, but this idea that he's going to end up in bed with her in the motorhome at 2:30 in the afternoon when he's meant to be having a shift, little bit of a stretch. But as I explained earlier in the review, I get why they've mixed some of these subplots and characters together, and I don't think there was anybody else I particularly wanted to mention when it comes to characters. Overall, I did really enjoy this. I hope I've sounded mostly positive throughout all this, because I did like it. I watched it all in one night. I mean, that tells me something. This is almost 3 hours long, and I did it in one sitting. You know, if I wasn't enjoying it, I would have split it into like an hour and a half over 2 nights, or maybe even 3 lots of 1 hour. There was one review I did for a film ages ago. I think it was one of the Howling sequels. It was only 90 minutes, and I split it into like 4 sessions of 20 minutes because I just couldn't handle it. It was so bad, but no such problems with this. I enjoyed this version of Salem's Lot. I still slightly prefer the Hooper one from the 70s because I just think it gets the vibe a little bit better overall. But this was absolutely worth checking out. And even though I spent a lot of the review comparing the two versions, because I think people would want to hear how it compares, when I was actually watching this thing, I wasn't thinking about any other version. I just got totally lost in it, had fun with it, enjoyed it. It suckered me in, and I had a really good time. And I don't regret at all checking it out. I think this is a really well done version of Salem's Lot. Time to show you the version of the film that I've got. Here is my DVD of 2004 Salem's Lot. It's very good quality to watch. No features on the disc, but that's absolutely fine. I didn't particularly feel like watching any documentaries or anything for this. It cost me £10, I think, on eBay. It might have been second hand, but perfectly reasonable value for an almost 3 hour film that is actually pretty damn enjoyable. Right, let's get to the bag of terror and find out how I'm going to score this. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 3.5 bloody axes out of 5. This is a perfectly decent adaptation of Salem's Lot. I might have even have gone to 4 out of 5, but for the fact that this film has been done before, you know what I mean? I have to take at least half a point off, I think, because of a lack of originality. But it's good. It's genuinely really good. So if you like Stephen King and you like Salem's Lot as a concept, then I would absolutely check this version out. Right, we'll leave it there for today, unless you want to stay an extra minute for my reading update. So I've just finished reading Night Shift by Stephen King. It's a collection of 20 short stories, and they are brilliant. Like, out of the 20, I'd say there's only one bad one, and that's The Lawnmower Man. But the other 19 are terrific. I had such a good time with this collection. I'd say my 5 favourite stories in this book are Jerusalem's Lot, which is a prequel to Salem's Lot, funnily enough, Graveyard Shift, Trucks, The Last Rung on the Ladder, and Children of the Corn. Those would be my 5 favourites of the collection, but like I said, 19 out of 20 just hit the sweet spot for me. Really, really cool. But that's all done now. I am moving on to the Aliens novelisation. Now, as I said in one of my previous reviews a couple of weeks ago, I've just recently read the Alien novelisation, which was brilliant, so I'm keen to see what Mr. Alan Dean Foster is going to do with this. One of the best sci-fi horror action films of all time. How will it translate into a novel? I will let you know in a future review. Right, we'll leave it there for today. Thank you for joining me for my review of 2004 Salem's Lot. Until next time, cheerio, bye-bye.